carregador que tá acabando a bateria. Eu já volto.
E aí, Robert, beleza?
Hey, Xavier. Hey, Austin.
Hi, Austin.
Hello.
How you are guys doing?
I'm fine. It's very cold here in São Paulo.
Yeah, I got a lot cold. And you, Austin? So while we wait for them, some things that I thought for today. First one is that I created a template for this slot so that we have sort of a ritual. On my experience, it's always good to, let's say, to take 5 minutes to do intro hobbies, and then we take 10 to 15 minutes to ask how has been the last week and what we have learned. And then another thing that I thought about is to create a questions and discussion section. Instead of being questions and answers, is questions and discussions. So the idea is that we have, let's say, discussions about any the questions. And then we could proceed to maybe some pointers, some news, and things that I could direct so that you guys, could have more immersion in the ecosystem. And also a step for, let's say, deciding any, let's say, next steps if we decide.
Okay.
Should we do 1 minute exercise?
I'm already doing, just for the contest, Danilo, he's doing 1 minute exercise each hour. So each hour he does some planks and then some flexions. And what I do to cheat on that is that instead of doing one exercise each hour, I keep working stand, and I sort of rotate my pelvis outwards. So I'm always exercising my glutes while I'm working. So this is a way of cheating.
Yeah. So we were thinking of every mentorship have some kind of exercise involved in the beginning. Maybe we could propose the standing one for the next week, so everyone get prepared. And this week for today we do 1 minute plank.
Yeah, but yeah, we could do the standing one next time. So guys, given that we have Austin and Xavier did not met him and Danilo also not, maybe it would be interesting to do a quick introduction hobby. So probably you already know me, Austin, but I'll do a quick one. I'm Danilo. We are doing Igaratá School, which is this program of, let's say, having these weekly mentorships, so people can, let's say, have some pointers on the ecosystem, and at the same time we have also this being paid to learn program, so that people have enough time for, let's say, get out their immersion needs. And my role here is sort of to be, let's say, the mentor in the sense of being the expert guy. I've been working on crypto for a while. I work at BlockScience. I'm a research engineer. I do a lot of modeling on crypto economic systems and so on. The history is long, but we are going to know all of it. And yeah, my role here is really to, let's say, to incentivize the discussions, to give pointers, and to have, let's say, go to this slot. Do you want to do a quick intro, Dan?
Yeah. Today is the second mentorship day, and we are mostly experimenting based on some values that we think it's interesting, like wealth transfer, and yeah, let's see where we can get in 3 months.
Xavier?
Oi. Hi. To introduce myself. Hi, Austin. I'm Xavier. I have a master's degree in physics. I worked with programming in physics teaching. Nice to meet you.
Mm-hmm. And you, Austin, do you mind giving an intro too?
Okay. I'm Austin. I have a bachelor's in physics, and previously I was working with machine learning and trying to predict properties of different crystal structures. Yeah, that's what I was doing before. Now I'm working with Longtail Financial, and that's how I got introduced to this mentorship.
Yeah, that's great. By the way, do you know if Taz is joining today or maybe next week?
I haven't talked to him this week, so I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. The first thing that I want to go over today is that, given my experience with those mentorship programs, I think it's always useful to have some kind of ritual, some kind of, let's say, templates that we know that we always start, for example, telling how was the week, and then we could, let's say, go over questions and discussions. And after, let's say, we go over that, we go over the steps of everyone, we discuss anything that we would like. We could go over through some pointers. And by the way, let's say the way that we get those pointers, it's really, let's say, horizontal in the sense that you guys could ask me for pointers. Or if not, I could try to think about some pointers which I think it could be useful for you. So maybe I could ask a question for you, or maybe you guys could ask for me. So the idea is to, let's say, to really be a horizontal exchange space. So, even though I have some experience, in the end, I perceive that, let's say, my role here is really to, let's say, in the end, let's say, be someone that can provide pointers. And after that, we can have, let's say, a section of, let's say, maybe having some next steps. So if it's the case, because it's always good to, let's say, get at the meeting and take 5 minutes and ask ourselves what we are going to do or what we want to learn. It doesn't need to, it's not that we are required to do or anything like that. It's just to, if anything come over. So I'll share here my screen briefly, just to. So I'm going to post that on Discord, but I have created a HackMD which I've called here the Igaratá school log. We have the calendar event here, so I think that you don't have the event yet, Austin. So perhaps you could click on that event, or you could send me the link. It's just so that you can track the event on your calendar. And also we have the Gmeet link here. I put here also a description of the template, so it is just like I told you guys. Intro rounds, weekly retro, question discussions, pointers and news, and next steps. And I also created here a session about meetings. And I put here some agenda. So if you guys, for example, have anything in mind before, you guys can always, let's say, ping me before, or we could put something here. I don't intend, let's say, to prep for all ones, but if you guys, for example, think that it's interesting for me for talk about something, or if you guys want to present about something, we can always, let's say, have some mini agenda so that we make effective use of the time. And of course, we have also a section here for reference for anything that we get. And this is a prototype. This HackMD is public. Everyone can edit it. So I just bootstrap it, but all you guys are super invited to, let's say, to make this document as your know. So if you guys, for example, think it's useful to have a new section, or maybe, it's always interesting to make that into something useful and that, let's say, allows us to, let's say, keep track of our memory, to keep track of what we are, let's say, doing and anything worth noting. So for the past session, which was last week, we did do some items. So I think that we did, let's say, give the news of the, you and Task couldn't join last week because probably we simply notified you with too short notice. But we did go over some steps. Like, for example, we did a description of what is this Igaratá school, how be paid to learn works, what's the rationale. Hey, Mots.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you?
Oh, doing great.
Yeah, sorry
So-
for joining late. I thought that the meeting was going to be happening on Discord. I was looking for the channel for a while, and I just couldn't find it.
Yeah. Well, we're still sort of, let's say, figuring out the best format to do this. So it's an experimental approach. So, by the way, if you guys think it's best to do on Discord, it's fine. I'm doing a Google Meet because, I mean, we started on Google Meet, but we're not exactly rigorous about it. So, Motaz, what I was presenting here, I have created this Igaratá School log document. It's a living HackMD document. Everyone can edit. And the idea here is that we are going to keep track, for example, of anything that we take note or maybe some ideas that we prep before. It's not, let's say, a huge document. You guys can take, let's say, ownership as where it's your own. And I was summarizing here what we did go over the last week. Like, for example, we did have the introduction of what the Igaratá School is and what is the big paid to learn, what's the rationale and motivation. We do the introduction also about EthicHub, which is, let's say, a case study that we are going to invoke during the mentorship program as, let's say, as a concrete example. The way that we could understand is, suppose that, let's say, we need any example project in order to, let's say, sanity check a new idea or a new tool. We can always use the EthicHub, let's say, as the learning guinea pig. So that's why we had this introduction. We did have also a brief introduction for stock and flow diagrams on the EthicHub contest. So we did a bit of a description of what's a stock, what's a flow, what's a diagram, why it's useful, and so on. And we did comment also about the balanced working session that we did yesterday. And for today, I put here on the edge the template for the slot. And I'm going to go over again, Motas, because I think it is important to let's say, to bring clarity how the slot is going to work. So the idea is that we start with introduction rounds, if applicable. So if there is a visitor or anyone that, let's say, we didn't sum before, there is an intro round. And by the way, you are super invited to do an intro round right now, because we already did the intro round.
And what would I exactly state in the intro round?
Intro round, let's say it's 1-2 minutes to you to speak about yourself, what you do, or what are your interests, anything that you would like to, let's say, people to know.
Yeah, of course. I'll give a quick intro round right now. My name is Mu'taz Abdurraouf, but I just go by Taz. So if you want, you can just refer to me as Taz if it's easier for you. I am a recent graduate from UBC. I just graduated the past month. I was a major in computer science, minor in data science. So I have interest in both front-end development and data science and analytics. Currently, I'm working at a restaurant in Kelowna, BC, but I've also been getting slowly onboarded onto LTF. And I think that's it for my intro round. I know it doesn't it's not that elaborate, but that's kind of all I could think of right now.
Oh, it's good enough. I mean, we all have our interests, and yeah, super excited to meet you. And you are going to see that it's full of interesting people here. So going back here to the template, just to bring clarity to the format. The idea is that, let's say, also we do the intro rounds if applicable, because if there is nobody new thing, we're not going to do that. The idea is that we do some kind of weekly retro, but it would not exactly be a standard retro in the sense that we are interested here in what we have learned on the last week, or what were our impressions about the ecosystem last week. It's really, let's say, a place where you can tell, oh, I found something interesting, or then, oh, there was a thing here that I found controversial, I didn't understand. It's really, let's say, a section where, let's say, we could share anything that we are, let's say, observing from the ecosystem. So probably this will take 10 or 15 minutes, maybe more, maybe less. After that section, we would have the questions and discussions. It's not to questions and answers, because the idea here is not to, let's say, that we provide hard and simple answers. The idea here is really to have discussions. So I highly appreciate, for example, open-ended questions or questions that bring even more questions. The idea is that we could, let's say, ask ourselves about anything that we are learning or a tool. It can be a technical thing, it can be a soft thing. And after that, we are going to have, let's say, what I've called pointers and news. I still didn't thought about a good name for that. But the idea really here is that I think that, let's say, one of my primordial roles on that program is really to, let's say, be someone that can provide any kind of pointers. So there are two ways of, let's say, providing those pointers. One is you guys, for example, sense the need of pointers. Or the second one is I perceive, let's say, what we are doing, and I proactively, let's say, provide some pointers. It will be a bit dynamical, but the idea is that, let's say, we can always have, let's say, that place here where we could do a quick hacking session, we could go over chat, we could, let's say, open Wikipedia together and hear about something, and so on. And the last one is next steps. So next steps is, I mean, you guys could communicate, for example, the intent of, let's say, I want to do that, or I want to do that. The idea here is not to be, let's say, rigid. It's just, let's say, if we do have anything actionable, we have, let's say, those last 5 minutes. So yeah, how do you guys feel about it? Does it sound good, or I mean, suggestions or comments? Seems too much or too little?
I just have one question. I'm not exactly sure what pointers are.
Yeah. So as I said, I still didn't thought about a good name for that. I'm still wondering. But the idea here is that, for example, it may happen that you guys, for example, are learning CAD or stock and flow diagrams, or how to implement computational models, whatever. And it may happen that, let's say, you guys, for example, want to learn more about something specific, like, for example, more about stochastic process, or more about how you do implement, I don't know, maybe agent-based models. So the idea of that section is that you guys, for example, could ask me for, let's say, pointers, and let's say, I could, for example, do a walkthrough through how to do some of those things, or I could direct towards, let's say, some. But there is also the other side of the question, because in that case, you guys are being proactive and I am being reactive. But also there is, let's say, the second option, which is I being proactive and you guys being reactive, in the sense that, for example, if I feel that, let's say, you guys could benefit for let's say, having a specific knowledge, like, for example, I see that it would be a opening if you guys, for example, did read about, for example, causal loop diagrams. This is also a place. So, and also news, because we have community events. Let's say, a great deal of this program is really to, let's say, also to be involved in the community. So you must have also this space that, let's say, we need to notify ourselves that next week it's going to have an interesting working session on Balancer, or maybe next month is going to have an interesting research group. So yeah, did it make it clear? As I said before, I still not sure what's the best, let's say, name for that. Let's say, it's a 15-minute time slot that I still didn't. I don't have idea of what could be the good name for that.
Yeah, okay, I think I get it.
So yeah, guys. if we are good with that, maybe we could, let's say, do our first experiment with this format. So let's say the natural thing to do now would be over Territro. And I think that we have some things. Yesterday, for example, we had a very interesting session on Balancer. What do you like? What do you think about starting first, Danilo? About, I mean, what you have learned last week, impressions, feelings?
Yeah, about the balancer meeting. It was the first time I participating. I think in a discussion of that level. I would say, and at first I was a little bit lost, but then I was starting to understand things little by little, and so it was very eye-opening. I could say. There's still a lot of things that I need to learn to fully understand what was really going on. But I think just being around and hearing also will make the learning process a lot faster.
Yeah, it was definitely a very interesting session because one thing that I like a lot about those token engineering programs, like the research groups and so on, is that you have contact with a huge variety of diversity of people. In the sense that, let's say, you see people that, let's say, are at the cutting edge of the development. You see also people that are on the research groups in order to, let's say, to learn more, are people that, let's say, are walking through, let's say, the learning curve. So you have all this diversity, and one thing that I like a lot is that those groups also have, let's say, a mix of skills. So a lot of times you have someone that is very advanced together with someone that, let's say, sort of beginning. And the questions are very interesting. Like, for example, I was even discussing with some researchers the last result yesterday, because there was a guy that, let's say, he was studying slippage on Balancer. And by the way, do you guys have familiarity with what is slippage on a EMM?
No, I don't.
Neither do I.
So I'll do there is a chart that I have here somewhere. I'll present very quickly because it's always nice to know. So let me share here my screen. So this is a chart that I have on my favorites. Okay. So the graph that I'm showing you guys right now is a representation of the constant product automated market maker, also known as Uniswap. You guys are pretty familiar with how Uniswap works. What's the constant product? Yes or no? Just to gauge. So just to explain quickly, Uniswap, probably as you guys know or not, is automated market maker in the sense that you can swap any token for another. And Uniswap is really, let's say, a case study on crypto because it was the first, let's say, I would say, truly decentralized exchange. In the sense that you have a very clear rule of how you can swap tokens. And that clear rule is the following. This formula here at the top, XE equals key, must always be true. Always. So every time that you do a swap, like for example, X plus delta X and E minus delta E, where delta X is, for example, the token that you are putting into Uniswap, and E is the token that you are getting out of Uniswap. When you do those operations of swaps here, that relation must always hold. And of course, if you take the equations and so on, you are going to get that formula here. So one interesting property of this swap is that there is a phenomenon that people call slippage. So what happens is that if your swap is very, very high in regards to the X and E, and by the way, X and E are Uniswap reserves. It's associated with liquidity pools. It's associated, I mean, it's a long conversation. But the idea is that when X and I that are the token reserves, they are very low in regards to the swap, or the swap is very high in regards to the reserve. What happens is that the movement here, it's not going to be, the way that I would put it is the following. If you take this equation here, XE equals K, and you plot into a graph of, let's say, E versus X, you have this smooth curve. But what happens is that all swaps on Uniswaps, they are always, let's say, linear movements. They are not linear. If you do one single swap, they are always linear vectors through this curve. And what happens is that if you do a very large swap, let's say that you are going to lose a bit of tokens in the middle of the process. So what happens is that, let's say, the best way of, let's say, swapping or Uniswap or Balancer or any EMM that makes use of that invariant here is to do a large amount of let's say, thin swaps rather than doing just one large swap. This is our way of, let's say, minimizing slippage. And as I said, slippage happens because you are introducing this vector that does not move across this smooth curve here. It is rather, let's say, a linear movement. And the idea is that the bigger the X and the I, the less slippage you are going to have. So, for example, if you take tokens that have liquidity pools that are very small, usually you are going to have a lot of slippage. And by the way, that's how liquidity pool works. I think that there is another plot here. This is interesting because, for example, this chart here shows what happens when you add or remove liquidity. So adding liquidity is equivalent to let's say, making that curve being farther away from the origin point. And removing, it's equivalent to moving that curve near it. So what happens is that the most you move that curve closer to the origin, the more curved it is in regards to, let's say, to a single amount. And the more far away that curve is from the origin, the more, let's say, the more linear it is. So this is sort of, let's say, the physical way of, let's say, describing what slippage is. If you guys want, I can send that chart afterwards. And I think it's interesting homework to, let's say, to get that chart and think about that. It's very interesting to have intuition about that, especially because EMMs, they are very common. And the phenomenon of slippage is exactly the rationale of, let's say, of why you need, for example, fees, because if you have, let's say, if the optimal strategy is to do a large amount of swaps of thin amount, this introduces a problem that you overload the network. So transaction fees, for example, help, let's say, compensating that. What do you say? Anything, Tess?
Yes, I'm beginning to kind of understand what you're trying to explain, but I also wanted to ask if there's anywhere you can send me these resources just so that I can sit down in my leisure time, read over them more just to familiarize myself with the concepts.
Yeah. If you guys want, I can get that link here. I need to see some specifics here, but yeah, I can send to you guys some resources about that. I'll prepare something after the slot.
Yeah, that would be really appreciated.
Yeah. But anyway, I don't want to also to derail too much the conversation. I just because I thought this was an interesting opportunity to, let's say, to introduce some concept. But anyway, on Balancer working session, we did have, for example, one research group that their question was about, let's say, what's the distribution of the slippage on the real event sequence of, let's say, swaps between Ethereum and DAI, and what happens if, for example, we shuffle those event sequences? And they got into a very interesting result that, let's say, if you shuffle the event sequence, the slippage that you have is very different from the real one. So It's a complicated discussion. They found evidence that maybe there exists some biases or some strategical behavior on certain tokens. It's a long talk, but that was, let's say, just the output of one research group, and there are several others that are doing super interesting things. And yeah, just a spoiler of what we had yesterday. So yeah, maybe we could go to the next. So for example, you, Austin, how it went your last week, things that you are learning, or for example, events that you participate that you found interesting?
Yeah, so last week I was participated in the Token Engineering Commons, and they were having sessions on game theory. And I think it's leading into game theory's applications into smart contracts. So I'm not quite too clear on how the two intersect yet, but it's the first formal teaching I've had on game theory, so that's been pretty interesting. So yeah, I don't know if you could kind of like give me a quick explanation of how you think the game theory and smart contracts intersect.
So several ways, because let's say, let me see how I could summarize that. Because smart contract is simply the realization of the logic that we want to, let's say, implement in economic design. So what happens is that on a lot of token systems and the apps and so on, there is always, let's say, the problem that you want, for example, to incentivize the participants to have a certain kind of behavior, but it's always taught because I mean, aligning incentives is always a problem because a lot of times the token or the smart contract is associated with a public commons. And I mean, you always have the commons problem that, let's say, if you have, for example, something that is accessible for everyone, how you align incentives so that, let's say, the commons are not exploited, but at the same time, they are not exclusive. So what happens is that, let's say, in general, game theory is used a lot, for example, doing analysis of, let's say, of some possible designs. But it really depends. But I think that the main point is that, let's say, when design any kind of token, you must always be a bit interdisciplinary in the sense that, I mean, you need a perspective from, let's say, game theory, but you also need, let's say, perspective, for example, from dynamical systems. And also, I mean, yeah, it's not an easy question, actually.
Yeah,
but
okay.
for example, but especially because, for example, one thing that game theory sometimes helps a lot, I think it helps more with, let's say, with a certain term implementation, in the sense that, for example, sometimes you have token system, let's say, where I'm thinking here about an example. Yeah, I still need to think that a bit. Probably because I'm a bit biased towards dynamical systems, and there is sort of, let's say, a conflict between game theories and dynamical systemers. But I'll tell that another time.
Yeah, that's okay. They're having the next session on Friday, so hopefully I'll get an opportunity to ask more questions there.
Yeah, but if anything, I would say that, let's say, the main role of the game theory is really to, let's say, to the design inspiration phase. Once, let's say, the rules of the game are set, they start to play less of a role. So they are more of, let's say, of a prior thing. It's more for, let's say, trying to lay out the specific rules, what could be at equilibrium or not. It's more for, let's say, description, let's say.
Okay.
By the way, are you guys familiar with Token Engineering Commons, Taz, Danilo, Xavier?
Yes, the group you mean, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is kind of my first meeting, so the one thing that I have is the CAD Beginners Bootcamp course that I've taken. Other than that, this is kind of my first time getting familiarized with the concepts. So I do excuse myself if I'm a bit sluggish with all of the concepts. It's all like very fresh very fresh concepts for me at the moment.
I mean, it's okay. I think that, let's say, one of the goals here is exactly to, let's say, to get you all you guys familiarized with all the concepts and interactions.
Yeah, I'll just need to like sit down and go over all the concepts by myself just so that I can be able to contribute a bit more in the next meeting.
No worry, you are already contributing. And you, Xavier?
I studied a lot about stock and flow models, a lot of macroeconomic concepts. I get into a Wikipedia effect, you know, uh, and I get the cat course too. I'm finished the course today. I don't tell you, I was accepted in the Omnipool research. I received the message yesterday, and I'm a co-researcher. I will need your help in this. I learned all this concept in an abstract level, and I want to understand better in the context that will apply these ideas. No? It's a discussion for the next weeks.
So it's great news that you got accepted into the Hydra. And do you want to discuss a bit about liquidity? Yeah. Okay. So maybe this could be the opportunity for, let's say, to initiate the section of questions and discussions. So liquidity pool. Let me share again that chart because it's very useful, that chart. Okay. So are you guys seeing here?
Yes, I can see.
Yeah. Okay. Liquidity pool. Let's take the most simple example, which is Uniswap. Uniswap, they have let's say they have liquidity pools for several pairs of tokens. Let's say you can have any pair of token, and you can have one liquidity pool per pair of token. So you could have one liquidity pool for Ethereum versus DAI, Ethereum versus Rapid Bitcoin, or Rapid Bitcoin versus DAI. By the way, are you familiar with DAI, Xavier?
I don't understand you, please.
DAI, the DAI token. Do you know about it? Okay, so I think it's useful because this is one of the tricky things when you are getting to the crypto scene. So we have a token called DAI. Perhaps we could even search here. So there is a token called DAI, which is essentially, let's say, fixed to the dollar. One DAI means one, let's say, fiat dollar. And DAI, it's really a very interesting token because a lot of people, myself included, consider that, let's say, the birth of DAI represents the birth of the DeFi scene. And it's very interesting when you read about that. Because the DAI, it's a token that, let's say, it's not physically linked to any currency. It maintains its value through essentially macroeconomic policies. In the sense that, let's say, you have a platform. I think it's Oasis app, something like that. not the band, but the app token, you can see that there is still not a lot of people that use crypto. But okay, so there is this Oasis platform that allows you to essentially lock DAI or buy DAI or lock DAI as saving things. You could, for example, lock Ethereum as a collateral and borrow DAI. I'm just telling those things, but I can send the link afterwards because, I mean, for one that doesn't still understand it, sometimes it requires a week or two to understand exactly how it works. But the main point is that DAI, it is, let's say that the way that it maintains value is essentially by, let's say, tweaking the interest rate, just like a central bank. So let's say if, for example, the DAI value starts to, let's say, drift off the $1, it starts to, let's say, get high or low, there is a mechanism somewhere that, let's say, is going to tweak some interest rates. And due to that, people will be incentivized to, for example, for borrowing or, let's say, or learning DAI. It's a very clever design. I won't dig in too deep into that. But the main point is that that was the birth of DeFi, and it was, let's say, one of the inspirations of token engineering in general, because it was an instance where, let's say, the token was working specifically because it has tweaked its incentives so that, let's say, it had stability. So instead, for example, of having, let's say, symbolic value or, let's say, or something like that, the idea is that tokens like that, they use, let's say, incentives that borrow inspiration, for example, from macroeconomics and so on. And it's interesting because it works. I mean, Ethereum has crashed, for example, at the beginning of last year, and the value has maintained stable. So I'm telling about DAI because one thing that this is a nomenclature that we are going to see a lot on crypto, because a lot of people, for example, when they want to exchange something that is more stable in value in regards to real world value, they use DAI because, I mean, it's more stable. So DAI is, I would say, it's a crypto dollar. If you guys want, I can send, let's say, I can get some references, I can put on the notes, I can send for you. It's definitely an interesting case where, let's say, using a bit of game theory, using a bit about macroeconomic knowledge can, let's say, can inspire, let's say, smart contracts that, I mean, have some interesting functionality. But anyway, going back here to the liquidity pool, I want to DAI because, let's say, the most, probably the pair that you are most going to see on an example, it's usually on the top of the list of the examples when you are studying MEMS, is the Ethereum DAI pair. So as I told, we could have one liquidity pool for each pair. So we could have a liquidity pool for Ethereum versus DAI, DAI versus Rapid Bitcoin versus Ethereum, and so on. It could be about anything that we would like. And our liquidity pool is essentially a pool that, let's say, contains stores of the two tokens. So you have X and you have E. We could interpret, for example, X as being, let's say, amount in Ethereum, and E as being amount in DAI. So a liquidity pool is simply that. It's simply, let's say, a store of the two tokens. But of course, there is a lot of context because, for example, if you take MEMS, what happens is that the liquidity pool is also associated with, let's say, other mechanisms, like, for example, a swapping mechanism, or how you add or remove liquidity, and so on. So, for example, on Uniswap, a liquidity pool serves for defining also the price of that token in regards to the other one. So, for example, in that case, the price of token X, it's going to be E versus X. So, as you can see here on my navigation bar, so, for example, by having those two amounts, you can define the price as being that. And liquidity pool, they can have some dynamics. Like, for example, a very common mechanism that uses liquidity pool is the constant product one in regards to swapping. So the idea here is that our swaps must, let's say, maintain that. And of course, if you want to add if you want to participate on the liquidity pool or remove that, then let's say, and by the way, it is an interesting thing about the liquidity pool because the liquidity pool is an independent entity. Let's say the liquidity pool is sort of like, let's say, a wallet associated with a smart contract. So it's interesting because when you participate on the liquidity pool, you must provide some tokens. You must provide tokens both on E and X. You must sort of provide, let's say, equal amounts of them. Give, let's say, offer the, let's say, for the same relative price. And when you participate on that, you essentially, let's say, you transfer your two tokens, and you receive a third kind of token, which is the pool tokens. So the pool tokens, it would be related to this key. So let's say that's what determines the liquidity pool. The token X, the token E, those two are holding custody by the liquidity pool itself. And key is associated with the amount of liquidity pools. But of course, by having this role here, you could have those swaps. And there are a lot of other complicated stuff you could put. So for example, most of the AMMs, they do have, for example, transaction fees. Like for example, Uniswap charges, I think, is 0.3%. And those fees, they get redirected, for example, for the liquidity providers. So the idea is that, let's say, those key tokens, they are sort of, let's say, tokens that represent ownership of the liquidity pool. And when people do swaps on those liquidity pools, a certain amount of that swap must keep on the liquidity pool. So let's say, in essence, people that have the key, they increase their amount of X and E simultaneously. So that was sort of it. I'm not sure if I did it dive too deep or not, but did it help a bit? In any case, guys, I'm going to send that chart for you afterwards. I'll search for any reference because most of newcomers that, let's say, see that first time, it can be a bit confusing.
Yes, also checking out, I think, the Uniswap website and seeing how it works, buying a token and adding some liquidity and removing it. Like interacting will definitely help understand because it's pretty simple. It looks complex, but the end results are simple. And yeah, at least that really helped me understand. If I first understand how it, like what it does, and then I looking at the numbers, it makes easier.
Yeah, and by the way, that's the interface of Uniswap. Sort of like the exchange that you simply put the number, you press the button, and there you are. So this is for swapping. This is for doing, let's say, the movement between, let's say, xi and x plus delta x. And if you want to operate on key, then you are going here on pool. I think that I do have some. Let me see here. No.
The V3 is a lot more complex.
Yeah, I do have some carbon credit here. Not much, just a bit. But yeah, guys, any more questions or comments or something about the liquidity?
I had done the Lucid chart version of the Kumu of ethics, but it's a lot harder because we don't have the double sides, let's say, arrow on Lucid chart, and maybe like you could take a look and see, and maybe actually we could work on it as, like you said, as an example, because I think we have the chart mostly, the flows mostly designed. So wanted to check with you that.
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So Austin and Tess, are you guys familiar with stock and flow or lost chart, Kumu? I mean, how familiar are those three things for you?
I took the beginner cat bootcamp course, and they like briefly touched on it, so that's kind of the extent of my familiarity.
Mm-hmm. And you, Austin?
Yeah, the same. I also finished the CAD bootcamp last week.
Yeah, I think that the cat bootcamp gives a good enough introduction. But you guys know, stock are points of accumulation where things. I mean, you have flows that essentially, let's say, are entry points. And you can also have, let's say, this third kind of element, which are the source and sinks, which essentially represents interaction with the external world. So most of the charts that you guys saw on the bootcamp was done on loose chart, which is a tool for diagramming. It's very general. You can use for almost any kind of diagramming. But we did deviate a bit from the, let's say, from the usual workflow in the sense that instead of beginning the stock and flow diagram on Lost Chart, we started on a tool called Kumu. So Kumu is a tool for, I mean, if you enter on their website, they are going to say that, let's say, it's to make sense of our messy world. The idea here is really to, let's say, to do what they call complex mapping. The idea is that you could have those nodes and you could have those arrows, but at the same time, it's, let's say, it's a very interesting format because, for example, you can, for example, put markdown in here, tags, and so on. There is a lot of options for formatting. It's a weird thing. It's sort of, let's say, it's sort of a graph visualization tool, but at the same time, it's sort of wiki. And the thing about Kumu is that it's very practical to use, and you can use it in a lot of different contexts. So given that, we did the idea here is that, let's say, we had this goal of producing a stock and flow diagram for EthicHub. And we thought that it was a bit more productive if we started on Kumu, and then afterwards we moved it over to Lost Chart. So just to explain a bit here, the thing here is to make sense of the colors. So yellow, green, and red are stocks. And orange and blue, humans and protocols, they are sources or sinks. So out the nodes, they are stocks or sources and sinks. And the arrows, they are flows. So the idea here is that Danilo was sort of trying to describe, for example, what was, let's say, the stock and flow interactions. Like, for example, you have a incentives pool, an auditor pools, a cover pool, compensation pool. All the green ones, they are ethics stocks. Ethics is the EthicHub token. While for example, if you take the yellow ones, which has the compensation pool, liquidity pool, and originators pool, they are DAI tokens, so they are in USD dollars. And also there is a thing that we have identified, and this one is an interesting thing, this head one, because it's a stock of local currency. And it's interesting because we only noticed that, let's say, we didn't have that need for a stock for operational pool when we started doing that stock and flow diagram. Because if not, it was not going to be consistent. So it's a interesting thing because, let's say, every time that you do a stock and flow modeling, it's not that you can simply do anything, because you do have some equations that, let's say, every stock and flow, in order to be consistent, it must have some rules. Like, for example, some stocks can be never negative. And not only that, but if you are describing endogenous system, by the way, endogenous system is something that, let's say, it's sort of the scope where we are analyzing. And in that case, the endogenous system is EthicHub, this application. What happens is that everything that, let's say, flows through the endogenous system, either it comes from, let's say, from another endogenous flow, or it had an exogenous interaction. And this is very interesting because mapping out that specifically allows you, for example, to identify where are, for example, the weakness points or points where you are exposed to external shocks. And also, let's say, allows you to see better the circulation of the token. And not only that, but in order to be consistent, the units must also be consistent. So, for example, all the flows on the green ones must be consistent in terms of, let's say, where they come from and where they are going to. Same thing for the yellow. And this head one was identified because on EthicHub, it's a social project for essentially, let's say, making things easier for farmers on developing countries. What happens is that the farmers, they don't interact with the token. They interact on the local currency. So when we were, for example, mapping the originator's pool, and this is a long story, probably Danilo could talk about it at some point. We did notice that, let's say, that diagram would only be consistent if we introduced a stock that is related to the local currency in order to match the equations. And of course, I mean, we could easily take, let's say, 1 hour just to go over this stock and flow diagram because it's got lots of things going on. And there is also the thing that, I mean, there is a lot of context here in the sense that, by the way, I'm going to send also a link for you guys about the EthicHub, just that you guys have some context. I think that we can change the language for English, but yeah. So Danilo, you said something about, let's say, about mapping loss chart, but I think that we don't have enough time. But I mean, I can still ask you after the slot. But yeah. Before, because we only have 2 minutes, I mean, I would like to ask you guys. I mean, any more new questions or considerations? Or impressions? By the way, how did go on, Taz?
How are you gonna send us the resources so that we can look over them in our leisure time?
So I'm going to get a lot of links. I'm going to put out the HackMD document for the log. I'm going to send on Igaratá, on TT. I mean, I'll disperse the link on some Discord places, so you guys are going to be aware of that. And it's all the resources that I collect for those sessions, it's always going to be on the same document. So there are things for the last week there. It's going to have things for this week. When we have our slot next week, we also are going to have the resources on the same places. So we are going to have this source of truth.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, can we get the link for the hacker document?
Yeah, I'll send straight away.
Share the log, Danilo.
Yeah. And there is a calendar event on the resources. You guys can, I mean, it could be interesting if you guys add to the calendar so that if, for example, we change, it's always good to have a calendar event. And for the next slot, so what's my suggestion? We do have this template. We could go over, let's say, of this hit of, let's say, you guys could tell how it was the week. We could ask questions. We could have interrupts, and we could, let's say, dig into the rabbit holes and ask. But at the same time, if you, in the meantime, during the week, if you guys, for example, have any questions or would like for me to prepare about something specific, let us know. We could put that on agenda. So, I mean, if you, for example, there is something specific that you think that it would be nice to prepare, just let me know. And that's going to be the format. It's going to be that dynamic horizontal format because, I mean, the mentorship slot they are really meant for you guys. And yeah, I hope it was useful for everyone. And yeah. Any final words before dropping?
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for all
Thanks,
this.
guys. Okay, till next week. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye bye.
Yeah, bye. Enjoy your days.